Hello and welcome to Delightful Computing. Thank you for having me here at this conference. Let's see. Fixing EPUB. Great Expectations. I'm not going to claim to channel Charles Dickens despite the title, but I think there are some things we could do better in ebooks, and I think some of the people at this conference may be some of the people who could help. So if we're talking about fixing something, there's a problem. What is the problem? The root of the problem is that electronic books mimic printed books. We're currently getting the vast majority of ebooks are print first workflows. But digital books can be interactive. Digital media can be queried. The fundamental nature is different, and the books, I claim, should reflect that difference, or at least they could reflect it, right? I mean, they could. Semantic markup, for example XML, is supposed to enable that difference. So let's think a bit about digital first ebooks, if it's okay with you. Here's a digital first car. Well, alright, it isn't, but it is an early automobile. That's a petrol engine at the back between the wheels, and it was quite some time before powered vehicles, self-powered vehicles, the automobile, the car, found its own form, its own shape, and until then it was trained to be a horse and cart, a wagon. Had steering systems. If you got in an accident with this, you'd be very injured, I think, by that steering device. But they were torn. Some of them had kind of fake reins, as if you were steering a horse, and some of them had a tiller to move a rudder. This one has a tiller, and it's based on a canal boat's tiller, and if you move it to the right, probably the car goes to the left. I don't actually know in this one, but quite a few were like that, because that's how it works in a ship. But most people who drove cars were not in fact helmsmen of ships, and there were an awful lot of accidents because you never knew when you got into a car which way to turn the steering wheel to make it go left or right. Lots of problems. And a lot of those problems stemmed from thinking about the car as if it was a horseless carriage, and the constraints that applied to horseless carriages in fact didn't apply to cars at all. Okay, so how can we make ebooks better? How to improve the ecosystem means making a business case for improving markup. It means generating customer demand for better books and e-readers. It means providing publisher tools for cost-effective tagging for improving the markup in books. And it means describing behaviours connecting these things, satisfying giving the business case, the customer demand, with publisher tools. Sometimes just saying something like this as bluntly as this can make it happen. I don't think it will in this case, but maybe it's a start. Okay, on slide 5, business case. Markup enables features. Rather than incremental improvements, I want us to go for I want this improvements, which is quite a big jump. Lots of examples. I'll give some of them I'll repeat some of them several times in this talk probably. Per book dictionaries. So if I download Lord of the Rings into my ebook reader, or I buy it, or whatever I do, it would be great if it came with a custom glossary that I could look up what a hobbit was. I could look up elves. I could maybe look up Cinder in words. Context-sensitive character and place notes. More about that in a minute. Live formulae, mathematical and chemical, and interactive diagrams. It's a whole host of things that haven't really been explored because, as at the Siebold conference once in San Francisco, Frank Romano, an industry consultant in the world of publishing, was giving the lunchtime keynote, and he said The printed word is not dead, he said. It just looks that way because it doesn't move. Well, EPUB can move. Let's make it move. Those of you who've been to XML conferences have probably heard talks about situational semantics from enrich and others. But let's look at semantics a bit. In the web, with HTML, we get browser semantics, we get search engine semantics. When people add a new element to HTML at WG or W3C, they're generally thinking about what will the browser do. They're thinking about how will this help a search engine. If you really push them, they might be thinking about how will this help accessibility. And the picture element is at least in part an example of that. I think what really made the picture element happen was the idea of saving bandwidth on mobile devices, though, multiple formats. In the JSON world, we don't really talk about semantics and markup. If there's semantics at all, they're defined by the application for which the JSON format was defined. There is a thing called JSON schema, but it's fixed types. It's integers and strings and things. It's about turning things into objects. The world of EPUB has this background, on the one hand, of print books, and on the other hand, of browser and reader semantics and metadata. And increasingly, perhaps because of the juxtaposition of the standards groups with the HTML and browser world at W3C, increasingly they're thinking of web browser semantics. But, in XML, one of the things that XML gave us was domain-specific semantics. So you can have a vocabulary that includes things that relate to what the information you're modeling. And we know in the XML world that's a super win. Behaviors are applied externally. The same XML documents could be treated in multiple ways, processed in multiple ways. But we go back to ebooks are in this browser headspace, whether it's a web browser or an ebook reader browser. They're not in the domain headspace. They're not thinking about chemistry or fantasy fiction or science fiction or anything else. So what do I mean by domain-specific markup? What can it do for us? In a fantasy novel with maps, such as Lord of the Rings, that I keep coming back to, more ways than one, I should be able to long press on Mirkwood to see where it is on the map, or right click or click or whatever I do in my ebook reader. I should be able to long press on Raskolnikov to see the entry in the Dramatis Personae at the back of the book or at the start of the chapter in a book like Crime and Punishment. I should be able to long press on melon, which is a noun, to see a translation into English that occurs in at the Gates of Moria and Lord of the Rings. I should be able to long press on Cathy and see her biography and her status at the current point in the book without spoilers. If I'm beginning to read Wuthering Heights, I don't want to be told the status of Cathy later in the book if I press on it in the second chapter because I've already forgotten her name. And I want to be able to search for these things across books, not just one book at a time. Search for people of a particular name in all my books or all the books I haven't bought, okay, at the provider. And the markup may help provide that. So search all your books for a character named Green. Not the colour green, the person. Be great to enter numbers into equations or click to see a graph plotted. There was a community group trying to do this at W3C. I'm rather afraid I and others kept pushing it back towards MathML because we had a mandate to encourage MathML. But digital first math teaching and things like Jupyter notebooks in ebooks ought to be a thing and aren't yet. Should be able to long press a word or a phrase to see the context-sensitive definition in the book's glossary. I really want to emphasize that because it's so useful. I read so many books that use jargon or that have names, you know, in a fantasy world it's the name of a city or whatever it is, and I've put the book down for a week to do other things, and I pick it back up and I can't remember what this word is. So show me Minas Tirith on the map of Middle-earth. Link to other books. If I see a quote from another author, I should be able to see the source and read it, and when I've done, come back to the original book. Fragments of music notation that you can play. Click a button to make them make a sound. Show me each note as it's played, using MusicML maybe. Not a video, because I want to be able to interact with it at a much finer grain detail. I want to be able to select a few notes, highlight them and have it just play those. And that comes into reader improvements, right? If I can do that. I want things like more wayfinding. I want a per chapter table of contents. I want wayfinding cards, which thumbnail of each chapter start. A number of people have written about this kind of idea. I want a split screen for a glossary or perhaps a parallel translation. In my low-ebb Diogenes, I want to be able to see the English and the Greek at the same time, so I can only read a little bit of Greek. The advantage of footnotes in print material is that you can see at a glance whether you want to read them or not. You glance to the bottom of the page. If it's a tiny footnote, it's probably a bibliographic reference. You don't want to read it. You glance back again, and it's within a second or two you can still remember where you were, assuming that you're cited. So let's have on-screen footnote thumbnails. I've also seen books that use different footnote symbols for different kinds of footnotes, and that can be a help too. That's an author level thing though, not a reader thing. For people who are not visual, or regardless of whether they can see or not, audible footnote dings, for example, when the reader reads out loud a paragraph, just make a little sound when there's a footnote reference, and at the end of the paragraph you can choose whether you want to go to the footnotes. Remove distractions. Less distracting also for those who read or for those who are being read to but are cited is an auto scroll mode with controllable speed. There are some websites that do that. The ones I've seen are for fan fiction, things like Stories Online, which where the quality of the fiction is somewhat variable, but the idea is great. My part really helps my partner with his arthritis, for example. How can we bring some of these things to be? We could have markup libraries like the text encoding initiative Pizza Toppings. The least cost kind of improvement would be a per book dictionary in the reader, included with the book and automatically installed just while you're reading that book. It might be that some readers do that and I just haven't used those readers, I don't know, but I haven't seen any. Better would be markup in the text, such as person name, org name. You don't have to mark them all. If you just mark the first one in each paragraph or in each chapter, that can be enough. Especially if you've got the context-sensitive dictionary, so if it's not marked up, people can still search and it will find that dictionary first. Best of all is context-sensitive markup, so a person name has an ID in it and at the start, or a ref in it, and at the start of each chapter there can be a little section giving the information about that person in that chapter, which could be updated halfway through the chapter too. JavaScript implementations for approaches like this would be great. Book readers currently don't do JavaScript by and large. That may have just changed with the new Kindle, I don't know. But by and large the JavaScript is either non-existent or very, very limited. And there needs to be a reason, there needs to be customer design, there needs to be customer demand, there needs to be a reason. Demand is generated by marketing, the perception gap. And what would make you want to buy the EPUB Plus version of Lord of the Rings or of Calculus for Masochists. And new readers, whether they're hardware or apps or web-based, with new features can interest the whole ecosystem. Publishers, vendors of devices, the competition, in other words, users, everyone. How do you get the markup in there? You need publisher tools. Sometimes it's the author supplying notes. So maybe John Ronald Reuel Tolkien may have written a little note in the text saying that Osgiliath was a deserted town near Minas Tirith, used as an outpost. In a later chapter, he may have said, Osgiliath, a ruin overrun by orcs. The publisher generally doesn't care about the actual content. That's true for the vast majority of ebook publishers in the past too, because we had this gold rush of taking anything from Project Gutenberg to in-house scans of books and selling them at the lowest quality they could get money for to minimize the cost. But if a simple tool where you highlight things and click on a mark brings in more revenue, they'll have a student do it. What if paying customers could also contribute? Right now we have what have other people highlighted as we're reading in the Kindle app. What if other people could highlight and mark a name and give it a glossary entry? And how do you police that? Books as silos for any. I'll show a picture of a silo in a minute. I want to search across all my books and other books like them. I want smart searching and not stupid searching that I get today. I want books that link to the next in the series, or related books or quote sources. And the links should use my copies of the target book that are already on my device, or they should offer to download the book for me. Let me buy the target book. Now, I don't care if the second in the trilogy is on Kobo and not Amazon. I'll read it in the Kobo app. Okay, so I want that to happen automatically. Wow. Here's a silo. This is. I actually got this by asking an AI art program to draw me a farm silo. It did a kind of mediocre job, but there we are. Breaking the silo. One way to break it might be using W3C's verifiable credentials. These are a way to say this user owns the right to read this book, but in a way that the public information, which is stored on a blockchain as everything else is these days, the public information says, this hex key is associated with this other hex key. And then your hex key comes from your book, one of them, and the other one comes from you. And so the reader can say, is that relationship stored in the blockchain, that this user has the right to read this book? If so, how about the ability to read any book in any installed reader, to mark your preferred reader, and to follow links from any book to any other, automatically being given that chance to buy the book, but based on what you've got the rights to do on multiple devices. That's scary if you're Amazon maybe, and it suggests breaking a monopoly. Less scary if you're Kobo, and I don't even know if Barnes & Noble's still in business. They were in a different country, they weren't in Canada. But the smaller publishers though would love this, because it means they get an in where currently they don't have an in. Collectively, we failed to market the idea of domain-specific markup to EPUB vendors. We failed to give them this idea of domain-specific markup. Is it an idea that's timely now? Kate Bush sang, "Only you can do something about it." There's no one there, my friend, any better. Was she right? Surely we're bright enough to outshine the stars. But the humankind gets so lost in finding its way. That's okay. Together we can change the world. I can't do it by myself, so I'm asking for your help. because together we can change the world. I'm getting all keynote-y now, aren't I? Sail past where it's been charted. Roll up your sleeves and let's get started. That's from a song Together We Can Change the World by Mark Shepherd. The text on the previous slide was from Lamb. Alright, so let's do it. How can we do it? Let's talk about it. Liam Quin, Delightful Computing.